Hey guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be recommending you some miserable books, but specifically based on track 5 Taylor Swift songs. I should start off by saying if you're concerned about this being a super Swiftie heavy type video, it's not going to be, but I am going to give a little bit of background information for the video, so if you want to skip all of that, like my Swift journey and stuff and like where I'm at with Taylor Swift, you can skip to this timestamp and then you'll be able to see a little bit more description about the list and then the list itself. But for those who are interested, I have just kind of recently been getting into Taylor Swift. So when I was younger, like middle school age, that was during, Fearless, Speak Now eras, and I really enjoyed Speak Now specifically. I liked Fearless as well. So I was kind of in it at that point, and then Red came out and it just kind of lost me a little bit. I wasn't as big of a fan of that album. And then as she got into pop, she just kind of lost me. Plus I just kind of moved on to other things, other interests. I've never had anything against Taylor Swift. I just wasn't a huge fan of her for a long time, mostly because I was mostly listening to podcasts and YouTube videos and audiobooks. That's been my main form of entertainment, and I would say it still probably will be. But since COVID, she's really just exploded, I think, with like the Folklore release in particular. Just really, I mean, she's always been big. It's not like it's very recently, but I feel like on like social media, it's really exploded in the last few years. And I finally was just like, I used to love her stuff. It's been a long time. I know she's kind of changed how she does things a lot, and I am interested in just getting to know, like, I want to at least have an answer when someone says, what's your favorite Taylor Swift album? I want to have an answer. That was like my goal going into this. So I was going to listen to all of the albums and see if I could figure that out. And then I just kind of ended up down the rabbit hole. I'm really not and never will be the type of person who gets super obsessed with a specific celebrity. I like songs. I don't like necessarily specific artists. Taylor Swift is probably the closest I've ever come to liking a specific artist, but like I know a lot of people go down rabbit holes of her personal life. I'm fine learning that stuff as I listen to different videos and stuff, but I'm not like seeking that information out. I don't really care what happens in her personal life as far as like as a fan. I am like, I care about her as a person, and I hate it when people get hurt, especially when they seem pretty innocent in the matter. For her specifically, being a fan of her, I don't like care. I don't need to know all the gossip and stuff, but I do really like her music. And so I was like, I really want to do a miserable books recommendation, but I want to make it more interesting than just like a top 5 or something. And then it just came to me yesterday, what if I did based on track 5s? So if you don't know, track 5s are known to be sadder songs. As I go into this list, know that I have ranked, they're in order based on my ranking from least favorite to favorite of track 5s. This does not match up with my ranking of albums, which maybe at some point, depending on how this video does and if people care to see it, I may do some sort of recommendations video based on my ranking of the Taylor Swift albums. I think that would be fun. But anyway, this is not that. I will also say, just a brief side note, that many of the track 5s, if not all of them, are about like relationships, and that's not really what makes a book miserable to me. That can really be a backdrop for a lot of it, but the books that make me cry have other things about them that make me cry. So it was a little bit tricky, honestly, to kind of figure out some of these, but I feel like I got a good list going. If you're not familiar with Taylor Swift's music, I will kind of explain what the song's about so that you have an idea of what I'm getting at with some of these books. So number 12 is The Archer, which is from the Lover album. I do enjoy the song. I just think it's kind of boring compared to a lot of the other track 5s. It is still a song that I really like by her. It's not like a skip song or anything. None of the track 5 songs are, but it's one that I maybe have a little bit less affection for because, yeah, I just feel like it's kind of boring. There's not a lot of really fun things about the song for me. But the song itself is basically kind of about a woman who is broken and has a lot of baggage, so to speak, but she also really wants to be loved and wants to find that. So maybe there's a little bit of a clingy aspect to her personality that chases people away, but also brings them in, but also she's known to be a beautiful woman. One of the most notable quotes in relation to this kind of idea is, "Who could ever leave me, darling? Like, you're beautiful, everybody loves you, but who could stay? meaning she has this baggage that makes it hard to be in a relationship with her. And the book that I chose for this is Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a story about a young girl who ends up falling in love with this man, but she also has this family friend who's in love with her, and all of the drama that comes out of that. It's set on a coastal town. It has beautiful atmosphere. Gaskell's writing is just wonderful, and she really creates very well-rounded, dynamic characters, especially for the Victorian era, which I just love about her writing. And I definitely feel like Sylvia is the type of person that would match the Archer this song. She's known for being beautiful in the town. A lot of people admire her. She kind of has a little bit of vanity, especially when she's younger. And there's definitely this feeling of who could ever not want to be with Sylvia. She's beautiful. Everybody loves her. But also she does end up with a lot of baggage and a lot of emotions. And she is, especially for a Victorian woman, she has a lot of personality and stubbornness to her that doesn't quite work with the Victorian ideals that specifically her family friend who loves her wants her to have. And so I just really feel like that song represents Sylvia really well, and this book is amazing. So if you haven't read it, you should. I will say I love miserable books. I love tragic endings. This has a tragic ending, but I actually don't really like it. I feel like it was kind of a tragic ending that was just made to be tragic rather than to build up on what the story is meaning and the messages and the discussions it's having. I feel like it could have ended in a slightly happier way, more of a bittersweet way, and been more effective in getting its themes across. But on the whole, I still really love it. I forgot to mention, I started with 12. You're probably like, why did you start with 12? There's 11 albums. I did divide up the anthology and tortured poets department, not because in my head I do. In fact, I usually, whereas a lot of people kind of do think of them that way, I do think of it as one album. But I like the number 12 for a recommendations list better than 11, so I went for 12. Anyway, moving on to number 11, I have Cold As You, which is on the debut album, and this song is really about basically being in love with this person and probably even in a relationship with them and having them be very emotionless, kind of stonewalling you and not letting you into their deeper emotions and thoughts and just really keeping you separate. And I had a couple that came into my mind for this one, but the one I decided on was Vanity Fair by William Thackeray. This is a story that definitely has more of a bittersweet ending. There's some happiness to it, but also there's some things that make it so you're like, it's not like a perfectly happy ending. Specifically, this story follows during the Napoleonic Wars. It follows two young women who are very different. One is very angelic, one is very not, and just follows their friendship as well as a lot of their kind of romantic entanglements and other issues. There's so much that happens in this book, but I feel like that's the best premise without giving anything away that I can give. But one of the main characters, our less angelic one, Becky Sharp, ends up in this relationship where she very much keeps these walls up. She kind of leads them in, lures them in, but she doesn't really give her heart very freely at all to this person, and it makes it so that the relationship, especially on his side, is very tragic. For her, she's just manipulative and likes to just kind of enjoy materialism and those sorts of things in life and doesn't really care for other people's feelings. Okay, apparently the garbage truck just drove up in my apartment complex and it's not being very quiet, so I apologize if you can hear anything or already did. But anyway, I think the relationship between Becky and her love interest, I'm not going to say who it is because I think that's part of the experience of this book, but Cold As You definitely describes that relationship and the tragedy of it, which just feeds into a lot of the other tragedy that goes on in the story. If you haven't read this, I know it's really chunky, but it is a lot of fun. I really, really love it and would highly recommend it. Number 10 is All You Had to Do Was Stay from 1989, which is an album that I have kind of controversial feelings about. Maybe at one point I'll do a controversial Taylor Swift opinions. If you're interested in that, like, let me know, because I feel like I'm in the minority on a few things within Taylor Swift's opinion range. So suffice it to say, there are a lot of songs on 1989 that I love and a lot of songs that I don't have very strong feelings for and a lot of songs that I actively don't really like on that album. So All You Had to Do Was Stay is one I'm kind of more in the middle on, but I do enjoy it. Clearly I enjoy it more than the other two songs I've mentioned for track 5s, and it is definitely a fun one to listen to. So I ended up going with a book. This is kind of more of an upbeat version of a track 5, but it is still pretty sad because it's just talking about an ex-lover coming back and being like, I want you back, but then just being like, you broke my heart. Like, we could have been happy together. We could have worked this out. This could have been the right thing if you had just stayed, but instead you left me and I'm just not prepared to take you back after that experience. And so it's kind of an interesting track 5, being so upbeat but having that message. So the book I chose for this is a really miserable book, and definitely the tone, like as far as the beat and stuff of All You Had to Do Was Stay, does not match this book, but the messaging does, and that is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. This is a book I read for school and remember enjoying it, but had forgot pretty much everything about it, besides, you know, the basic premise of this woman who is caught in adultery. It's not a spoiler, it says it right at the beginning, and she ends up being punished for it by her community, and in it, the father of her child just completely abandons her. And it comes from an understandable place because of his reputation, obviously, but there's also this kind of double standard of like, he can get away with it because he doesn't have a child, whereas she has that all that responsibility that lands on her, and she has to take that up. And there reaches a point where he kind of comes back and is like trying to apologize, and they want to make it work, but also there's very much this sense of all you had to do was stand by me, all you had to do was stay with me, and we could have gone somewhere else, we could have done something else, but you left me to hurt the way I've hurt. My favorite thing about this book is honestly the way it's written. It is beautifully written. I love Nathaniel Hawthorne's writing. I have read one other book by his and I didn't love the plot, but his writing just like gets me. I just freaking love it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. I think Hester Prynne is a very interesting character, and the events that take place around her and other characters involved with her are also very interesting. There's a lot of religious symbolism in this and a lot of other gothic kind of elements thrown in, and I just freaking love it. It's so good. If you haven't read it, you should. It's definitely one though I don't think should be read in high school because I think the language is such that you wouldn't really understand it, but if you're older, I think you can really appreciate it. Number 9 is Dear John, which is from Speak Now, which is one of my favorite albums, and like I said in the beginning of this, it was kind of my favorite album growing up, or one of them. And Dear John is probably in my mind one of the weaker songs on the album, unfortunately, as far as ones that really just grip me, but I think the lyricism in it is really well done. This song follows specifically her Taylor Swift's relationship with John Mayer, and he was a lot older than her when they had this relationship, and so there was a lot of, you know, the things that go along with that kind of power dynamic that is involved in that. He also was kind of like an idol for her growing up, and so there's also that power dynamic of mentor-mentee kind of a feeling. And it discusses a lot about like testing each other, him testing her and her passing, but him not really caring because he just wants to keep testing her and messing with her. Very much an emotionally abusive kind of situation. And the book I went for this is kind of an interesting pick in some ways, but also I feel like it does match up with a lot of those feelings, and that is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichec. This story follows Angrboda, who is a witch in Norse mythology who was married to Loki, god of mischief, and their relationship is really sweet in a lot of ways, and it's not like there's an age gap issue where she's really not in power and he is, as far as like age wise, but there is this feeling of she's suffering a lot because of him and his choices, and also her background, which she kind of shares with him, but like he's able to live his life and she's stuck where she's at. And also he's the god of mischief. He has a lot in him, a lot of emotions, and plays a lot of games. Not that he's not serious in this book. I want to make it very clear he's a very serious person, and he really does share a lot with Angrboda. Like they have a real relationship, and it's not over the top emotionally abusive like Dear John kind of suggests, but there is still kind of this feeling of him like just kind of expecting her to always be there, kind of testing her in slightly different ways, not necessarily purposely, consciously, but just in his actions, just kind of treating her like, oh, you'll always be there, I can kind of do whatever I want and treat you however I want, and you'll still be there. Again, to a lesser extreme than is in Dear John, but it's still there. And this is also one of my favorite books of all time. It's one of my favorite non-classics of all time, and the cover is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. So if you are interested in Norse mythology and like kind of the mythology retellings that we have had recently in recent years, there's been a huge resurgence with that. This one is definitely one to check out. Number 8 is White Horse, which is from the album Fearless, and this is kind of similar in some ways to All You Had to Do Was Stay, but a little bit more sad, I would say. It also has more of a somber tone, which I really like with the track 5s, hence why it's a little higher on the list. And it's basically about kind of being, I can't think of the word, it's going to drive me crazy, but basically like the stars are leaving the eyes. You've been in love with this person and you're just constantly hoping they'll change, hoping that they'll become a better person, and then they just don't. And then eventually you just give up. You're just like, it's too late. One of the main lyrics is, it's too late for you and your white horse to come around. And for this, I'm going to discuss a book I've discussed many times on the channel, but it works so well with the song, and it was just too perfect for me to not do it, and that is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. I am not going to give you all the details of why this song works because it's a lot of spoilers, but suffice it to say, this book follows a young, poor girl in the 1800s who ends up being really bowled over by her family and by society. That's all I'm going to say. It is such a tragic book. It is one of my favorite books of all time, if not my favorite. There's one other that's actually on this list as well that it kind of competes with a little bit, but I really, really love this book. And I love Thomas Hardy. His writing is amazing. It is pretty flowery and a little bit silly, like some of the words he uses are kind of big and ridiculous, but I love that. I love using big, unnecessary words in books and songs, hence why I like a lot of Taylor Swift songs, honestly. But suffice it to say, White Horse and that whole idea of being disenchanted, oh, I knew that word would come to me, with a relationship and just kind of giving up on it really hits home with this book. And if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about, and you might cry like I did when I thought of that focus. Anyway, so that's all I'm going to say about it as far as that goes, but this book is amazing. Tess is a fabulous character, impeccable. Thomas Hardy's writing, amazing. There's so much great foreshadowing that is really obvious but beautifully done, and so it makes it feel less ridiculously on the nose because just the way he presents it just hits all of the marks. And I honestly, Thomas Hardy's writing style and Taylor Swift's writing style has a lot of similarities, so frankly, if you like Taylor Swift, you may really like Thomas Hardy if you're getting into classics. But yes, Tess with White Horse, very much love it. Number 7 is How Did It End, which is the unofficial track 5 of the anthology part of Tortured Poets Department. If you don't know, that album was a double album, so there was an original release, and then she suddenly decided to mention, oh hey, it's actually a double album, here's the rest of the songs. So there were 31 songs. It was crazy. So How Did It End is not officially a track 5, but it's kind of representative of a track 5, and it definitely hits the marks that it's supposed to with a track 5. This song specifically talks about a relationship falling apart and everybody, you know, caring and having all this empathy, but also just wanting to know all the details, wanting to hear the gossip. And so it's kind of a shallow empathy because they're not really caring about how to help the person. They just like want to know all the details. And for this one, I ended up going with another Victorian novel. There's a lot of classics on this list because I think there's a lot of classics that just work with some of these miserable songs. But the one I chose is He Knew He Was Right by Anthony Trollope. This story follows a married couple primarily. There's also a lot of other side plots and stuff. This is a chunky book in the Victorian era, which means it has a lot of different little side plots. But the main plot point and the titular more plot line is this young married couple who, it's been a few years since they've been married, so they're kind of past the honeymoon stage, and something happens where the husband has a very strong opinion about it, and part of that is kind of influenced by his friends and other people who start saying things. There's a lot of gossip, and she does not think she's in the wrong. She thinks that what she's doing, which is what he has an opinion about, is fine, and he's just making a bigger deal out of it than it needs to, and both of them are very stubborn, and it just kind of explodes. And definitely a big part of this is people talking about like what's going on, what are they doing, wanting to know the details. There's not really anybody that either of these people really have that really care about them and wanting to hear. They just kind of all have their own opinions about which side they agree with more, which side they think is being ridiculous, all of that jazz, and it just kind of leads to all sorts of unnecessary drama because both of them are being really stubborn. But it does lead to a lot of that gossip, and there's just not a lot of empathy for either one in this story, and it's just honestly really heartbreaking. Imagine that. It's a miserable book, recommendations, and this one's pretty miserable. There is, I will say, if you are afraid of tragic endings, this one has a little bit more of a happy ending, like some of the plot lines that are just as big as the main one or close to it, end very happily, but the main plot line unfortunately does not. And something I really like in the song How Did It End was it kind of switches from people asking that to Taylor Swift asking, or like the person narrating, asking themselves, like, how did it end? Like, can I even pinpoint what caused our relationship to end? And I feel like this book definitely leads into that feeling of, especially the female character kind of getting to this point where she's like, how did this happen? Like, how did we get to the point we're at? It's honestly one of the most frustrating reads to me, but it's also one that's really stuck with me, and I do love Trollope's characterization. I think he does an amazing job with that, exploring relationships and exploring all of the dynamics between people, and he never has like a bad guy. They're always very dynamic and interesting, and I just love his style. This isn't my favorite by him, but it is one that, like I said, I think about a lot. Continuing on the classic train and continuing with Tortured Poets, my number 6 is So Long London. This song has kind of a lot going on in it, so it's a little bit difficult to like pinpoint exactly what it's about, but it's basically just about a relationship ending and about both sides kind of pointing fingers and someone like leaving behind something where it's kind of more of a long-term relationship, and so you're leaving behind a whole bunch of things that have become like home to you. The book I decided to go for this is another classic, and that is Les Mis by Victor Hugo. Specifically, I think of Fantine's relationship that she has. This story follows all sorts of different characters. The main character is Jean Valjean, who was a prisoner and then was let go, but because of his background as being a convict, he's not really able to get a job, and then finally he kind of just takes control of his life, but it leads him to skip out on parole, disregard his past and his obligations as a convict. So obviously the law gets involved, and then he ends up meeting other characters who have really heartbreaking stories as well, and they all kind of influence each other. That's probably the best way to describe it. It's a huge book. It's probably the biggest book I've ever read, but it's amazing. And Fantine is one of the characters that is, I would say she's a main character. She does kind of only come in for a small portion of the book, but she really has a huge impact on everything happening, and her story is really, really tragic. She is one of the most miserable parts of this completely miserable book, hence the Misérables being the title of the book. But she has a relationship where she really falls for this guy and trusts him and expects to have this relationship and future with him, and then he just kind of abandons her, and so there's a lot of wistfulness because of this, especially because she is left with a child, and all of the emotions and scandals and stuff that goes along with that, all of the burden that this man just kind of leaves her with. And he's very much a manipulative, like, it was never gonna work, kind of pointing the finger at her a little bit for not recognizing the truth of what this relationship was supposed to be. And that very much kind of is suggested in So Long London, and so I feel like this book really works for that. It's also amazing. Another one of my favorite books of all time. I freaking love it. I honestly so want to reread this book. Also, this crying girl, this really depressing looking woman, that is Fantine. So like I said, she's in such a small part, but she plays such a huge role in everything that happens in this book, and I think So Long London is a great track to represent her story. Number 5, we're getting into our top 5 track 5s, and my number 5 is You're on Your Own Kid from Midnights. This is a song that is different from the other ones. I think this is the one track 5 that's not really about a relationship. In some ways it kind of is, but a lot of it is really just about growing up, especially Taylor Swift just having some abusive relationships and also being a part of an industry that doesn't really treat people very well unless they're being perfect. And there's a lot of discussion about like people from your hometown just kind of abandoning you, and just people who should have been with you through some really hard things and difficult fights and huge scandals and things, who kind of end up abandoning you. And for this I decided to go with Beartown by Fredrik Backman. This story follows a small town in Finland? Sweden? I don't really know. Anyway, they're really into hockey. Like, that is their game. That's their thing. That's what puts their town on the map. And their local hockey team has been struggling a bit, but they have this JV team, basically. I don't think that's what they call it, but basically like a JV team that is really amazing and really has the potential, once they, you know, grow into the next team up, to really put this town on the map and really save them, basically, because they have a lot of economic issues going on within this town. town. And then one of the players on the hockey team does something that causes a huge scandal and hurts people very deeply, and it creates this big division between the town, and the victim of this choice is this girl named Maya, and it's very much exploring people being on her side, people being against her, and just how alone she feels, even though thankfully she does have people supporting her. But there is this feeling of, you're on your own, kid. Like, you have to go to school and deal with all of the backlash from this event where you were seriously hurt. You have to deal with social and political constructs that really get in the way of you being able to get justice and heal from the pain. It's such a good book. Fredrik Backman, if you haven't read anything by him, writes incredibly well, beautifully. I absolutely love his books. I haven't read a lot of them. I've read this one and the sequel to it, and then I've read A Man Called Ove, and that's it. But all of them are amazing. He's so good. He's one of the best, like, more modern authors that explores the well-roundedness of human beings, and I absolutely love it. Even the people who are absolutely awful in this book and do terrible things are still seen as actual people with a lot of sides to them, where you don't necessarily have to like them or think they're in the right, but you still recognize them as human beings, and I just love the way he does that. It's super amazing. And then his writing style is also just really, really beautiful and well done. This book is truly amazing. It is heartbreaking. It made me cry a lot. It does end with more of a bittersweet kind of feeling, so if you like more of that kind of miserable book where it's not totally 100% sad, then you may really enjoy this, and you should read it because it's just so good. Number 4 for me is Tolerate It, which is from Evermore, which is one of my favorite albums, but this track 5 is number 4 on the list. This song was actually in part inspired by Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, so there's a little shout out for that book, but I didn't want to make that the book I recommend because that seems a little bit too easy. So the book I ended up choosing for this song is The Chosen by Elizabeth Lowry. Tolerate It is basically about a woman who's in love with this man. She does everything for him. You know, she makes a beautiful dinner. She does all of these things. She's excited to see him when he comes home from work, and he just kind of tolerates it. He doesn't really show that love back or really appreciate it. Super heartbreaking. And The Chosen actually follows, going back to Thomas Hardy, it follows his experience after his first wife Emma dies, and reading some journals she had written, recognizing her pain and just recognizing his own pain after this loss of this complicated relationship where they really had separated in a lot of ways by the end of her life, just kind of not getting along and really struggling to know each other, really seeing each other as annoying strangers, basically. And so he has all these complicated emotions of remembering the good times, but also being frustrated by her and a lot of the things she did towards the end of her life. But as he reads these journals, he starts to understand where her head was at and where her heart was at through all of that. It's a very grief-focused book. It's very slow because it's just focusing on all of the grief and all of the reflection and all of that. And so that's really the focus of the book. It's not really about plot or anything, so know that going in, but it is a beautiful exploration of a very complicated grief. And for Emma Hardy, very much she felt like he was just tolerating her love, tolerating her care for him and everything she does for him and tries to do for him, and he just kind of tolerates it and doesn't appreciate it for what it is. It's very heart-wrenching, but it's beautifully written. I think Elizabeth Lowry very much pays homage to Hardy's works as an author in a beautiful way. It also does have a lot of references to Tess of the D'Urbervilles, so if you haven't read that, I feel like that creates an extra layer to this book that is worth, reading that first and then coming to this one. But it is a wonderful book. It's one of my more recent reads, and I'm so glad I finally picked it up this year because it was just great. Number 3 is All Too Well from Red. I know a lot of people love this song. Another one that's probably a controversial opinion that I have. I do really enjoy it. Obviously, it's number 3 on my track 5 ranking, so I really, really like it. But honestly, it probably could swap places with Tolerate It. It's pretty close to that, and I know a lot of people just it is their song. They freaking love it. It's just one that I enjoy. That's really the extent of my feelings towards it. So there's my little controversial opinion. But All Too Well is basically someone reflecting back on this relationship they had where they just were very mistreated, specifically by an older guy who also has done things since they've broken up that make her think that he still thinks thinks about her, but also he broke her heart and like continues to break her heart because of some of those things. Along with the reflection, there's also this feeling of anger and betrayal that goes along with this song as well, and it's beautifully done. It's a wonderful song, especially lyrically. I just don't think it really quite grips me the way it does a lot of other people, but I do really enjoy it. It's number 3. So anyway, the book I went for with this is maybe a little bit of a different pick, maybe an unexpected pick for some people, but there's a specific relationship that I feel like matches up with a lot of the feelings felt in this story, and that is Assassin's Apprentice, or The Assassin's Apprentice, the Royal Assassin series by Robin Hobb. Specifically, it makes me think of Molly and her relationship with Fitz. So on the whole, this series follows Fitz, who is a child born out of wedlock to the future king of this realm. And when he comes to light, the prince decides to abdicate the throne because of all the scandal surrounding that. And he leaves, but then Fitz is just kind of left with this identity where he's taken to the palace, but nobody really knows what to do with him. And so he eventually ends up being trained as an assassin for the king. And throughout all of this, we follow his relationship with Molly, who is this girl who he meets on the streets of the main coastal town that the castle is a part of. She is very lower class. She has a lot of difficult things. She has a very abusive father and runs rampant a lot as a young child. And then as they grow up, she of course matures, grows up a lot, and they slowly, fall in love. And then a lot of things happen, and he really just doesn't fully appreciate her. He just wants to possess her. And ultimately, by the end, there's a lot of feelings of betrayal and hurt on her side, where she just feels like he doesn't trust her, where she feels like he never really cared about her. He just wanted his person or whatever. And there's just a lot of heartbreak that I think matches up with the song all too well. I remember it all too well. She remembers, he remembers them as children and all of the fun they had, and then as they grew up, the fun they continue to have, and then after they end up choosing each other, there's just so many things that get in the way, both self-inflicted and inflicted by society, that just cause so much anger and hurt that I think is well represented by the song. This series is wonderful. Robin Hobb, another incredible writer. It is definitely more of a slow burn fantasy, so if that's not your jam, just know that is a thing. But I really love it. I love Robin Hobb's characterization. I love her descriptions. I just love sitting in her writing, which I can't always say when I read books, but this one with her writing, it's just the truth. I just love sitting with it, and Molly is a very fascinating character as well. Number 2 is Delicate, which is from Reputation. This is like the least sad song as far as track 5s go, but it is a little bit more of an emotionally driven song, particularly for Reputation, which is a little bit more of an upbeat, dark side kind of album where there's just not a lot of sadness involved in that particular album. It's more angry. It's more of an anger album. But Delicate is kind of a softening song within it because it's about having a lot of scandals surrounding a person and having their reputation just be crap, but then having someone come along who they really love, who seems to love them back, who brightens things up, but also there is a delicate situation that they're in because of all of the scandal and the reputation problems and things like that that she's dealing with. Like, he's going to be taking on a lot of baggage. It's such a fun song. I really love it. And the book I chose for this one is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Now, this is one I actually enjoy, but it's not like a favorite of all time. I know a lot of people really, really love it. It doesn't quite hit me that way for certain like taste reasons, but I think it's beautifully done. In it, we follow a woman who is married, but she ends up falling for this man who is just really bad for her. That's all I can say about it. But he is not her husband as well. That's a big part of why they're not good for each other. And then also he just has a reputation himself for being a womanizer a little bit. Ultimately, he does truly fall for her and is willing to put up with a lot, but it is a very delicate situation. I mean, not only is she cheating, but also he has this reputation, and it just will lead to a lot of scandal, especially for the time. And I feel like Delicate just captures kind of the feeling, especially they have in the first little bit of this book, book. As time goes on, things get worse and more tragic and harder. But in the beginning of their relationship, I very much think Delicate just captures that feeling that they're having. But anyway, this is great. It's another chunky 19th century novel, so if you're interested in that, this is worth a shot. And number 1 is My Tears Ricochet from Folklore. I love this song so much. It's one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs. Honestly, Delicate kind of is as well. But My Tears Ricochet also might be one of the saddest track 5s in my opinion. So maybe that's why I love it so much, because I just love a good, completely heart-wrenching thing. But My Tears Ricochet is basically talking about a relationship that's over, but there's a lot of baggage that goes along with that. So kind of similar in some ways to All Too Well, but I think a lot deeper. I think at one point Taylor Swift compared it to like if people get divorced and it's someone you obviously expected to spend the rest of your life with, if not eternity with, if you believe in that. And you're remembering those emotions you had, but also having these more recent emotions that are obviously much more hurt and much more angry or sad, and just all the conflicts between those kind of experiences, and this kind of like you're torturing each other, but at one point you loved each other so much, and just the paradox of that experience. And with all of that mess of emotions that are involved in this song, I felt like the only book I could really talk about in association with this is a book that most of you have probably heard of. You've probably heard me talk about it if you've been on this channel. You very well might have already read it and already have strong opinions about it. But if you haven't and you like My Tears Ricochet and all of the mess of emotions going on there, Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë might be a book you need to try. Heathcliff and Cathy have the most dramatic and ridiculous relationship ever, and I think My Tears Ricochet is like a more tame version of the mess that is them. The whole I didn't have it in myself to go with Grace, and if I'm dead to you, why are you at the wake cursing my name, wishing I'd stayed, like so Cathy and Heathcliff to the max. My Tears Ricochet is being symbolic about some of these things and like the funeral procession and all of that jazz. Wuthering Heights isn't, because it's a 19th century dramatic angsty book, and so you know death is actually involved in it. I won't tell you how or why or what happens, but no, this is a miserable book that has funerals in it and really messy love story, and it's great. You're going to hate almost all of the characters in this book, and it's the best thing ever. I freaking love this book. It's amazing. This one and Tess are the ones that vie for my favorite book constantly. It just kind of depends on my mood, but Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte's writing is amazing. She's also a great poet, and so you really see that in this book. Again, the characters and the drama, just amazing. My Tears Ricochet, Cathy and Heathcliff, it is just a definition, honestly, of their relationship. I freaking love it. So if you want to be a mess and see whether you end up on the side of people who hate this book or love this book, because there's not really very many middle people, read it and find out. It's great, and you may really hate it, but it's great. All right, that is it. This video is freakishly long. Hopefully I can shave it down quite a bit, but those are my recommendations. Let me know down below your favorite track 5 if you have one. If you've read any of the books on this list, let me know. And if you have any recommendations for miserable books, please let me know that as well. I would love to hear. I hope you are all having a great week, a great reading month. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!